Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe, here with me is my co-host Dan.
Hello and greetings.
Today we're discussing love. Oh, sorry, I couldn't resist that. Namely, most suitable love interest for Link in Ocarina of Time. The one that kind of makes the most sense considering the Twilight Princess timeline. At least the one in which Twilight Princess finds itself. As to the other timelines, this pairing doesn't really matter. First off, when Link first meets Malon, it's in Hyrule Castle Town. That is to say, the town that's connected to Hyrule Castle. Malon is there searching / waiting for her dad, who went up to the castle but fell asleep because he's a lazy bum. With Malon a little steamed over this, and later she chews him out because Talon really did screw up. That said, Malon notices Link's fairy and proceeds to give him the nickname Fairy Boy, which sounds very demeaning, and I'm reminded of a know-it-all bossy little girl, just calling a boy who tries to be as macho and boyish as possible Fairy Boy, to feminize him a little and demean him. Before you say I'm coming down hard on Malon, it's because little girls do this all the time to boys. In this case, it is hilarious that she is doing it to the hero of time. That is to say, the hero of Hyrule. Before he even becomes an adult, he does become a great hero. But of course, he has the most demeaning nickname imaginable for a boy. Fairy Boy.
It's a very cute nickname.
Yeah, not gonna lie that it made me a little fond of her as a kid because I thought it was a riot that Link was known as Fairy Boy. But if we actually think about it, fairies in Irish and Celtic mythology were nature folk who were all but born from the forest. The thing is, one did not want to anger fairies, for they could be very terrible in their wrath. There are other beliefs regarding fairies, and they could be remarkably unpleasant in some stories. They could be pleasant in others. But ultimately, the Irish believe that one should respect them. So, in a way, Fairy Boy is also a reference to Link's deep connection to nature, because he does have a very, very, very strong one to nature, coming as he does from the Kokiri. Given that the Hylians are essentially elves, there is also something to be said about the fact that elves were basically Norse versions of fairies, and thus Link himself is a fairy in a way, if you look at it from a Nordic mythological standpoint. The second time you meet Malon, it's after you've kind of sent her dad racing to go apologize and beg for her forgiveness because he messed up, is at Lon Lon Ranch, where Malon ends up sharing that her mother had passed when she was young, and that before she passed away, her mother had passed down to her a song, which, given that everybody seems to want to trust you with a lot of music in The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, it's no surprise that she's just like everyone else. In Ocarina of Time, music plays a large role. Good to bear in mind that in Irish mythology, the world is sung into being by, I think, the goddess Brigid. And so music in Irish mythology was believed to be the source of magic, because when humans create music, they're creating something that is very beautiful. And this belief system was not restrained to the Irish pagan religion. Gaelic Christianity has some of the most beautiful music in history. When the characters are giving over to Link music, they're passing to him a powerful, deep magic, to use a term from Narnia. A deep magic that is as old as time itself, I would argue, at least in the context of Zelda. Now, Zelda has always seemed very Celtic in a lot of ways, and I imagine that Miyamoto Shigeru drew a lot of inspiration, but he's also himself a very passionate nature lover, according to him, at least since childhood. That said, Epona's song is really the song of Malon's mother. So this is the magic of a mother's love for her daughter. When she is passing it on to Link, this is a very beautiful act. And I know that most tend to look at it as her entrusting her heart to Link, yes, to an extent, and that it's at this moment that true love is awoken. I'll argue no, but I will argue that in a way it's an act of great compassion on Malon's part. The way I like to read it as a kid was that she didn't have a mother, but she at least had her for a short time. Link is coming into this a complete orphan with no mother figure, outside maybe Saria. So what Malon is passing on to Link is this bond of mother and child that Link has never truly experienced. And in a way, it's the ultimate act of compassion and kindness. Malon is kind of sharing this bond that she had, Link never had, and so it's almost like her mother's kind of becoming Link's mother, in a way. This is a very beautiful thing that's being done here.
That is a very fair assessment. Yes, this is the first real friend that both Malon and Link have found.
Yeah.
Because, yes, Link had the other Kokiri.
But after he was cast out from the Kokiri forest, he doesn't have any friends.
Because even with the Kokiri, they always treated him as a bit of an outsider.
Yeah.
Only Saria truly treated him
with full love and sincerity. Yeah. One other thing. Epona in the Gallo-Roman religion was protector of horses, ponies, donkeys, and mules. She was also a goddess of fertility. And so we'll come back to that later. But Epona, the name means great mare. There's something very important being stated about the horse as well. In a way, it's like she's a protective spirit over Link. I know you're kind of protecting the horse, but in a way, if you look at it mythologically, the horse is protecting Link. Most Zelda tubers will mention the whole, oh, want to marry Malon scene involving Talon, Malon's dad. I don't feel that scene's the most important. Oh, well, haha, I was joking. And, most will say, that's what he was really thinking. Yeah, maybe to an extent, but I think he was genuinely also riffing. I just read it more as he's joking around.
He's teasing a little boy.
Yeah. The Gossip Stone, though, is the more interesting one. It reveals a melancholy inside of Malon. The Gossip Stone, just outside the Temple of Time, which says that Malon wishes for some knight to one day come along in shining armor to sweep her off her feet. This has, of course, connotations with old stories about chivalry. The romance tales of Arthuriana and whatnot. And the thing is, Zelda is strongly linked to Arthuriana. Malon's wish to be swept off her feet is also melancholic because it shows that she's not happy where she is, even as a little girl. She's lonely. The greatest knight in mythology is Arthur. I know people will say he's a king, but a king is also a knight, at least in traditional medieval Europe. Arthur is the greatest knight in mythology, and the pulling out of the sword from the stone is a great moment for Arthur. Arthur was to, in traditional mythology, sweep several ladies off their feet and come to them in shining armor. I think sometimes also on a white horse. That image of Arthur is important, and Link is directly derived from that image. Though I would argue Link is more in line with the archetype that Gawain, the nephew of Arthur, the second greatest knight in Arthuriana, the Maiden's Knight, is always there to defend the honor and good name and virtue of every lady, because whether she be lowborn or highborn. And Link, I would argue, is the warrior archetype in the model of Gawain. It's just a modern retelling of the story. This is why really what Malon is praying for is someone like Link, whereas he later is, I should say. Now to get into the whole time skip thing. Here, we skip forward 7 years, I believe.
Yes.
In that time, Ingo, Talon's brother, usurped his place as head of Lon Lon Ranch. While Talon was lazy, he wasn't mean-natured. Ingo is just cruel and essentially enslaves his niece. And here's the thing. Ingo and Malon were in the same position, having to clean up after Talon. This shows a lack of empathy on Ingo's part. He is unable to see that his niece and him are in the same position. Instead, he enslaves her. But one of the worst things Ingo does is that Ingo promised Epona to Ganondorf. Epona is a goddess in traditional mythology. This is the promising of a sacred animal, one that is representative also of the bond between Link and Malon, I would argue. So it's a violation of the divine feminine in this story, as Malon plays also the role of daughter in the tripartite goddess archetype. But her story is also interesting because she's also in the Cinderella position, enslaved by a relative and forced to labor endlessly. In the manga, they tried to make her annoying, but really I just found her all the more pitiable. And I actually found that I sympathized with her and had little patience for Link's crush on Zelda in the manga. Now, I'm not saying I'm not on board with the occasional Link Zelda pairing. It's just the manga did not endear it to me. Whereas with Malon, there's an air of melancholy that I actually find more suitable for the pairing. The other thing with Malon's situation is she was waiting for a knight in shining armor, and he came, which there is a poetry to it. The thing about older Nintendo games, such as Fire Emblem and Zelda, is that they often went more with the classic knights and lords and hero tropes, which there's a beauty to that. I actually prefer older stories like that myself.
Same, and for a knight to choose a much more modest lifestyle is a common trope in these stories.
The thing with Link is he wins a great horse race. Management of the ranch seems to fall over to Malon, as it was meant to be. That said, and we'll probably also give our thoughts on that, but Link being sent back in time by Zelda means he has to live out his years properly. Now we're getting into the events of Majora's Mask. It doesn't seem like Link has forged any kind of connection whatsoever to Zelda in the intervening years. He did, however, have to go back and get Epona. Now, if we also look at Malon's deep-set connection to horses and Epona as being tied to her mother and father, I wonder if we shouldn't regard Epona as almost maybe linked to Malon's mother by spirit. That Epona's song and Epona, almost the embodiment of Malon's mother. And that when Link is using Epona's song to call the horse, he's calling for aid from Malon's mom, in a way. And if he went back for the horse and relies upon it in Majora's Mask, is this not him kind of relying indirectly upon Malon? Which of the two bonds were more important to him? Because him and Zelda reunite at the end of the game, but nothing really comes of it. Whereas Link had to go back to Lon Lon Ranch and get Epona. That shows that there's a stronger connection to nature. And
you have Malon that wouldn't just give her prized horse and the song her mother gave her to just anyone.
True. They have to have forged some sort of connection. Link would spend quite a bit of time away, given the events of Twilight Princess, which show in Twilight Princess, where the Kokiri village used to be, there is now Orden Village, which is the starting village, and apparently the hero of Twilight is the descendant of the hero of Time, the direct blood relation. We have to kind of go by process of elimination for love interest. All right, let's list them. You've got Ruto. Given that there's no gills, we have to assume that Link basically turned her down. There's Zelda, but the trouble with Zelda is that the Princess Zelda of Twilight Princess is a direct descendant of Zelda. And yes, I know there will be some who will argue, what about a distaff line? But none of that is mentioned in Twilight Princess.
And it doesn't help that because Zelda sent Link back to the past, she closed that door.
In a way, yeah. I guess thematically she did. I'm actually of the opinion that maybe in another game, Link and Zelda would get together. For example, Link and Zelda and Skyward Sword are a thing. Link and Zelda in Breath of the Wild. Sure. Maybe even A Link to the Past. Or even the original two. Actually, that's probably the one that makes more sense. But in Ocarina of Time, it doesn't seem to work, I think. There's another factor. Apparently, Ganon broke free from the seal in the intervening years, and Link hurried back to fight Ganon and to save what people he could. At least that's the supposition a lot of people have. And that he founded the village Orden, and he had kids. Given who might have been closest at hand, and probably one of the refugees, Malon. But we also have to bear in mind that Malon wished for a knight in shining armor to come to her rescue. Maybe Link did come to her rescue this time around again, and maybe they did end up getting together. But in this case, the act of bringing people to the village of the Kokiri would have been almost a heinous act. Now, the Kokiri would have withdrawn further into the woods because naturally there are different people. But I think that Link would have impulsively brought one or two people like Talon and Malon, maybe even Ingo, but he would have had to have consulted with the Great Deku Tree. And the founding of this village would have required the Great Deku Tree's blessings, which in a way would also mean that the building of the village require the Great Deku Tree's blessings. And so for Malon to move into Link's home with him, weirdly would have required the Great Deku Tree's blessings. So that this is a weird thing where Link had to seek the blessings of her mother, she had to seek the blessings of Link's surrogate father. And so in a weird way, they're kind of seeking the blessings of each other's kin, which is a very traditional old thing to do. And what's more is that the hero of Time apparently died in battle, feeling unfulfilled, and as though there was still more he had to do, or so he says, as a zombie warrior of sorts that you fight in Twilight Princess. Thus, it has been supposed by a few YouTubers I've seen that Link left when his child was newborn and left Malon as a widow. I would suppose that no, that maybe given that Epona's goddess of fertility, why does there only have to be one lineage? My supposition would be that given that you have a goddess of fertility, it is very likely that there was multiple children born. Bear in mind, this is a medieval period. To hedge your bets on only one child seems to be a little weird. The hero of Time wanted to build a large family to guarantee his bloodline. He would have had more than one child. As to the village administration, Malon would have been wiser in those ways. So she would have lent something certainly to the village and to Link's life there. I'm just getting into a bit of the practical stuff there. But that said, honestly, she's also feels like the most fleshed out of the love interests in Ocarina of Time. Ruto is certainly amusing, I'll grant you. Zelda does have some good moments, but the thing is, Zelda just serves the purpose of just, here's your quest, hero, go off and do it. Thank you.
There's some distance.
But that said, Zelda's fulfilling an ancient archetypal role, the queen. But here's the thing, the queen and the warrior are never to meet. The queen is to marry the king. Ocarina of Time Link is not the king archetype. He's the warrior in his fullness, the knight in shining armor. The king is lover, magician, warrior, all entwined into one. And so I would argue, no, the pairing can't be. Sadly, because Link does not have the necessary archetype, and there's also the matter of bloodline. the Hylian royal line seems to be withering on the vine, and this after a possible succession conflict. There's no way they would allow another succession crisis to brew by marrying the princess to a peasant, and not to mention a kid from the forest. Not gonna lie, we are probably gonna have to at some point discuss the possibilities of the pairing as it's shown in other games, as there are games that do a good job showing the pairing. It's just Ocarina of Time does too good a job building up Malon as a character and building up thematically the character and her relationship with Link. I would argue that Majora's Mask adds an element of loneliness to Link that Link seems to have properly bonded with, and who seem to have understood Link's particular loneliness and longing for a family seems to have been the Skull Kid and Malon. But maybe the Skull Kid could wait for another video.
Yeah.
But what do you think?
The story of Lancelot, where Lancelot being more the Shadow Warrior archetype, wanting to woo the queen, which should not occur. In Ocarina of Time, you've got both that go their own way.
Yeah, I think
they reject
each other in a way. I always read it into the text that maybe Zelda longed more for Link than vice versa. Not to say Link didn't long for her, but that he kind of grew away from her. She was left to marry some nobleman. I kind of imagine that she might have found some happiness before she had to flee as Ganon unleashed himself upon the world once again. We're just talking the Kid Link timeline. We're not getting into the other two because they're their own thing.
Yes, because Zelda deciding, I'll send him back, even though she did have an opportunity to marry the savior of Hyrule, which is Gran. She sent him back, which implies, no, this can't be.
And it also shows that she has not yet reached her full maturity, in a way. I'm only gonna say that the reason for that is that she longs for her father more than she does Link. Because sending him back means that part of her might be sent back as well, I think. I always read it that when you see her at the end, she does have the memories of the future, somehow, thanks to the Triforce of Wisdom. Because in all three timelines, Zelda has a Triforce of Wisdom. And I think she longed more for her dad. And I'm not going to begrudge her that. It's her father. It's like Kaylee from Quest for Camelot with her dad, Lionel. But the thing is, Link has reached his fullness. He is the warrior in his fullness. The difference is that Malon, who is the lover archetype, because she is the lover in her fullness. Beautiful, radiant, and hair glimmering in the sun and a cheerful smile on her lips. That's Malon, although there's melancholy always weighing upon the world. And so I kind of think that given that she gave a gift of music that's actually much more personal, that gives Link a connection to animals, which is in a lot of Celtic societies, animals are very sacred. Like in French, Scottish, Irish culture, animals are sacred things. Your dog, your horse, these are precious children for you to care for. And this connection she gives to Link and shares with him is why she's probably the #1 gal in Ocarina of Time. Tell us what you think of this video, of our thoughts on Malon, and don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button as though you were Link putting an end to Ganon.